Hi and welcome. The second and last part of chapter 4 defines a few more concepts that will be used later. Let's start right away with the first one, crank. Crank is a rather simple concept. If two co-alta aircraft fly TA and ATA at 0, then the respective VC components are equal to the speeds. If we introduce an offset, then the VC components for our aircraft is not equal to our speed anymore, but is inferior. In this scenario, the resulting VC is less than the previous case. Crank is often used post-missile employment. The idea is to reduce VC and therefore maintain separation while supporting the missile. Moreover, incoming missiles are affected as well, as they have to turn to chase our fighter. Depending on the situation, cranking may lead to the kinematic defeat of the incoming missile. As you can imagine, the greater the offset, the lower the closure rate, and the more effective the maneuver is. Besides post-missile employment, crank is a quick shortcut to indicate an aggressive cut into, for example, without compromising radar awareness. Notching is, in a sense, a continuation of cranking, and shares the same effects on VC. However, there is much more to it. In premise, notching is a means of defeating radars and missile seekers. IPRF radars, in fact, use Doppler effect to find their targets. Without going too much into the details, to avoid ground clutter, HPRF radars use a filter that removes returns having a relative speed equal to the terrain. By flying perpendicular to the radar, the fighter's relative speed becomes the same as the terrain, and its return is hidden to the hostile radar. Note, however, that medium PRF and low PRF are not as affected by notching, and they have other drawbacks. MPRF, for example, suffers at low altitude, whilst low PRF is heavily affected by the ground clutter. As mentioned, notching, in a sense, is also an extreme form of cranking, and therefore can kinematically help to defeat potential incoming missiles. Let's now see some concepts that will be useful going forward. They may not make sense entirely right now, but they will later. So WEDs, NEDs, and LAR describe the interaction between aircraft and missiles. Feel free to pause to read the definitions from the slide. Simplifying them, WEDs expresses where a missile can arrive when launched by hostile aircraft. LAR is somewhat similar, but from the fighter's perspective. NEDs instead describes where a missile can arrive with enough energy to potentially always reach a target, no matter how it maneuvers. Second slide, again feel free to pause to read the definitions. DOR and MAR will soon become familiar terms. They both indicate the ability of the fighter to launch and leave the area, but they do it at different ranges. DOR enables a further turn into the target, for example for a follow-up shot. MAR instead is critical and dictates the limits through which we may be in serious trouble. DR and FR are a bit more complex and specific to certain situations. The decision range is somewhat in between DOR and MAR. The idea is notching, assessing what the hostile is doing, and deciding what to do, either go in or abort. The factor range is a bit simpler. If we plan to merge, we probably want to make sure that there is enough distance between different groups so that they cannot support each other. Last slide, you know the drill. The last four definitions are about poles, not Sobieski's glorious brethren. Poles are intended as ranges, sometimes indicated in feet, although nautical miles are more handy. A-pole and M-pole are related, with the difference that A-pole is vastly more used in our gaming context, and they should indicate the activation of the IPRF or medium PRF seekers. E-pole is intuitive and reminds of MAR. The idea is defining a range past which the fighter cannot use maneuvers to defeat an incoming missile. And finally, the F-pole is the distance fighter target when the missile reaches the target itself. It does not mean that the target has hit it, though. As you can imagine, coordinating every detail of the engagement whilst flying, monitoring comms, instructing wingman and pilot is a lot to do, both in-game and in real life. Therefore, a good chunk of parameters is defined during the briefing, and so-called contracts are established. It goes without saying that, depending on the organization of your group and personal preferences, some of these points may fall in your SOP already. Others may not entirely applicable. Sometimes they are not even called contracts and they are just pre-briefed points. Point is, the fewer elements have to be decided whilst flying, the better. These contracts can cover whatever you want, even silly things. Since this is a video game and we do not practice or study this stuff every day for several hours, feel free to define any variable you may think that can make your life easier later. For example, who pulls the trigger? Seems silly, right? But think about it, both Rio and Pilot can usually launch semi-active radar homing and active radar homing missiles. Imagine you are in a complex and stressful situation and you don't know who is launching the missile. In some cases, you may waste a few precious seconds, in others you may end up launching 2 missiles and potentially wasting one. This has happened to me a few times already whilst playing with random pilots, so it's not a possibility as remote as it may sound. So let's see more examples. So when does primarily comms? Moving to the section, the radar mating parameters and sanitization, the formation and commit spacing, or the switching of responsibility and tactical lead, queried with the AOR, timelines definitions, default parameters, group criteria definition when we move to the controller, the targeting depth value, the tactical range call distance, and when we move to everyone, the commit authority, if the mission commander, the package commander, or the controller. So the list is long and many are not applicable in every scenario, but this should give you a general idea. If you're lucky enough to recurrently fly with a trusted friend or in an organized group, you will soon notice that most of them are defined only once. The definition of group is critical instead, and is also a problem when working with old radars and standards that are not used anymore. Thinking about the F-14 Tomcat, the nav grid as the bullseye comes immediately to mind. Another example is the correlation, where the target's azimuth and altitude should be within a few degrees according to modern Navy documentation, but good luck nailing that using the BDHI. A crucial error when sorting the AIHRS throws it off by 20 degrees or more. On the other hand, making sure that our aircraft and crews can work with modern assets ensures better integration, flexibility and efficiency, ultimately leading to better results. Crew comms may not seem applicable to single-seaters, but I found that they are indeed useful, especially if you practice using modules such as the MB339 or the C11. For multi-crew modules instead, crew comms are bread and butter. The thing is, given aircraft of similar capabilities, a two-seater will always have an advantage over a single-seater due to the less workload, the additional set of eyes scanning for threats, and so on. However, if the coordination between the two players is poor, the outcome can be a disaster. So if ad hoc contracts help to formalize the relation, comms add them to make it work. There are several sources we can use to write down the basic lexicon. As for everything else in this study, comms change depending on the country, era, aircraft, and so on. The Chief of Naval Air Training's docs are a great source. Others can be different books, such as Per Ardua, about the training of an RAF Phantom crew, a book I thoroughly recommend. Both this book and the transcript of the second Sidra incident are reported in Chapter 3 use nautical terms. For example, rather than left and right, they use starboard and port. At the end of the day, it's up to you. The list of fundamentals commands include directions, such as the mentioned left and right, and also changes in altitude. The second slide reports some of the commands used to change speed, to quickly switch from endurance, for example, to max power with afterburner. Finally, we have a couple of commands related to geometry and engagements, such as center the T or the dot. This command instructs the pilot to maneuver to match the steering T displayed in the AAC and discussed in Chapter 2. Let's now take a brief look to the ARIO report. This is a short means of communicating the position of a target using a simple formalism. ARIO is the acronym for Azimuth, Range, Elevation and Overtake. Along in-cockpit references, I found it to be very useful to have the pilot spotting and calling tally on the target whilst transitioning from BVR to within visual range. After all we discussed, let's see a real-life example of crew comms, or better put, how they should not be done. In Chapter 3, I reported the footage and transcript of the already mentioned second Gulf of Sidra incident, so take a look at the video if you want to follow the whole engagement and listen to more comms. Here, I want to focus on just a few seconds, in which the radar intercept officer of 207 fires a Sparrow, and the reaction of the pilot is quite unequivocal.
Alpha Bravo from 207. 13 miles. Fox 1. Oh, Jesus.
Not only that, a moment before the pilot was calling for Alpha Bravo, the big boss, but he never got the chance of discussing the situation. Did you think this is all? Nah, due to the confusion and how quickly things escalated, the pilot was not ready to use his M9 Sidewinder, and this led to another odd exchange.
I've got the other one. Select Fox 2. Select Fox 2. I got Fox 2. Trailer. Coming hard, stop. So fucking shoot him. I don't got a cone. Got the second one. I got the second one on the nose right now. Hey, I'm high cover on you. Get it, lock him up. Lock him up. Hey, shoot him, Fox 2. I can't, I don't have a fucking cone. So what?
Now, this is real life. Adrenaline is pumping, the situation is complex, and so on. so mistakes happen. Sitting in our comfy chairs instead, we should work with our fellow crew member in a more positive way. For example, something I loved whilst playing Arma 3 was listening to the squad or platoon leader reporting the situation and his intentions to the higher level. This is not always possible in DCS because the exchange requires a few seconds, but when it is, it provides a ton of awareness to everyone else, in our case, to the pilot. And that's it for this chapter. We should now have most of the tools we need to take the first in-depth look to a simple timeline. Thanks for watching and take care.
Oh, Jesus.